we are very excited because this is our last webinar in the series that we've been running since we started this process during Evidence 2020 online. So it's been an amazing journey for the AEN to be part of these discussions and learning from different individuals that have participated in these events. Just to make sure that the webinar goes very smooth, let's go through some housekeeping. We will invite participants to participate as much as possible. And just to let you know as well that this session will be recorded, because we want to be in a position to share a recording with you that goes with the blog to continue the conversations that are going to take place during this webinar on different social media platforms of the AEN. Please have your camera off just to save bandwidth for other participants that have slow connections, so that they can be able to stay as long as possible during the webinar. And also please keep your mic off unless you are prompted to comment or ask a question during that part of the session, just to reduce the background noise for the webinar as we are recording. In case during this webinar you experience any technical issues, please write on the chat for Precious, and then she will sort you out. And also during the discussions that we're going to be having, please engage with us on the chat. If you have any comments, any questions, Charity, my colleague, will be managing all the inputs and questions on the chat. And during the question and answer session, she'll feed those comments and questions in the discussion. Just to share with you a bit of background around this. The manifesto that is the culmination of all of these discussions was drafted by a working group that was formed to work towards Evidence 2020 online. And this manifesto was the output from that particular working group. This manifesto is a declaration by all African evidence ecosystem about what kind of capacity development we practice. And also this approach is Africa-led to enhance capacities for EIDM in Africa. And most importantly, it serves as a resource and inspiration to the evidence ecosystem in the continent. And also it challenges the mainstream views on capacity building in EIDM in the continent. If you haven't gotten an opportunity to read this manifesto, please check it. It's on our website so that you can, engage with it as well from your side. Just to share a bit with you about this webinar series, we launched this during Africa Evidence Week 2021, and we're running it through this year, which is now, this is our last webinar we're running this year. And the objective of the broader series are to share experiences, enhance connections, and also just continuously, enhancing the manifesto on capacity development, just to make sure that, those conversations are going on and we keep sharing with one another. With that background, I will hand over to our moderator today, who is Ms. Jennifer Opare-Kumi, who's going to facilitate the discussions this afternoon. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Siziwe, for giving us the bigger picture as to what we're all doing here today. I'll just like to, before I introduce our fantastic panelists, just highlight again the objective of this specific session, which is to consider when and how we can and should be measuring the outputs and outcomes and impacts of our EIDM capacity development initiatives. So Siziwe has already mentioned, of course, the bigger primary, secondary, and tertiary objectives of the capacity development webinars that have been going on since Evidence 2020, so 2021, sorry. So with that, I will just go ahead and introduce our panelists. Our first panelist today is Ms. Jenean Pretorius, and Ms. Okay, sorry, I thought someone wanted to add something. Okay, so Jenean is an M&E technical specialist at the Center for Learning and on Evaluation and Results, Anglophone Africa, CLEAR AA WITS. She has over 10 years experience across the public, private, and NGO sector, with particular emphasis on social research, M&E, and public policy. At CLEAR, she is responsible for facilitating and training, curriculum reviews and development, and overall capacity building at country and institutional levels. Jenean is currently reading for her PhD in Inclusive Education at Wits University. In 2010, she was awarded a distinct fellowship in Advanced Participatory Planning M&E by the Netherlands government. Her research interests include research evaluation, inclusive education, evaluation capacity building, and indigenous M&E approaches. A warm welcome to you, Jenean. And then we also have Deo-Gracias Houndolo. And Deo is a senior evaluation specialist at the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation, 3IE. He is currently the regional coordinator of the West African Capacity Building and Impact Evaluation Program, WACIE. His works focus on policy analysis, design of monitoring and evaluation systems, and impact evaluation of programs. His areas of research cover poverty dynamics, analyses, and rural development monitoring and evaluation. He holds an engineering degree in agronomy from the University in Benin, a master's degree from Copenhagen in Denmark, and has completed a master's degree in microprogram and applied development economics from Laval University. He is also a lead trainer for the program in rural monitoring and evaluation, the Partnership for African Social and Governance Research, at the African Institute of Monitoring and Evaluation, Barometer, and the National School of Administration of the University of Abomey, Calavi, in subjects related to policy evaluation. A very warm welcome to you as well, Dale. As you can tell, our panelists are very experienced, and we are really privileged to have them both here today. And just to set the scene for us to initiate the discussion that we're going to be having here today, that we really anticipate very open discussion from everyone that has attended this webinar. I'm going to ask Jenean and Dale, maybe Jenean, you can go first, to just set the scene of EIDM, capacity development in your context and your experience. And maybe you can also lay out a few examples and why you think, measuring EIDM capacity development is important. Over to you, Jenean.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that introduction. And let me start by appreciating the organizers, AEN, for this event and the webinar series. We've been excited to see what has been done so far, and definitely looking forward to the session. So we really appreciate and we're excited about being here and sharing and also learning from you as well. So it's a pleasure to be here. So allow me to preface my opening remarks on who we are at CLEAR AA and what we do. CLEAR AA is one of 6 international centers, and we are based at the Johannesburg branch. And so CLEAR AA works within Anglophone countries on the continent. And so there has been a shift in the last few years in terms of our work and what it's been centered around. So, for example, there's been a strong emphasis on training as it relates to evaluation capacity, technical advisory services. But in the last few years, there's been a much more systemic outlook towards it. And so it's been centered, our work has been centered around country programs. And so the general framework and the general approach towards our M&E work is around evaluation capacity from the individual, the organizational, and the country level, or enabling environment level, if one can say that. So we absolutely support evidence generation. We have a lot of tools and examples that we can draw from, and we will get into that, I guess, as this discussion pursues. And just to say also that we are very intentional about not just building capacity, but how we build that. And so reflecting on some of the approaches like collaboration or collaborative work. So for example, we would have done 2 in the last year, 2 collaborative interventions with around curriculum development with University of Unza, or rather Unza as in University of Zambia, and then the Malawi Assemblies of God University, working with them. And so this understanding that we are partnering with, and that's kind of the approach that CLEAR has taken in the work that we do. I think in the manifesto, which I really appreciated, AEN's manifesto, there's this language around capacity enhancement. And I think that movement in the language of capacity development, capacity building, and to when we're talking about African-led approaches or African-led capacity building, there's this understanding that we move from a place that we add to, and that by doing that, we're recognizing that there are in fact capacities on the ground. And I think that's really important. And so when we work in and with different countries, there is this appreciation also for indigenous ways, and really seeing how we can work best with countries and local partners, including them, and reminded of the fact that context is so key in working with local players on these different interventions. So that's kind of our approach to the kind of work that we do. And I think I will pause there as far as my introductory remarks are concerned. And I think as we, like I said, as we go and as questions arise, we can draw from different examples and kind of research studies, just to give sort of an Africa-wide context of what we've been finding as it relates to evidence generation and general evaluation capacity initiatives on the ground. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Jenean. There's so much to unpack there, and I encourage everyone here today to please put your questions into the chat. Charity will be collecting these for us, and we'll have a time where you can interact with our panelists. Deo, over to you, same question. Please give us an idea of the landscape of EIDM, what you're thinking about, why measurement capacity development is important, anything that you would like to share with us today in setting the scene. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jen, and thank you, Jenny, for your introduction remark. As far as I'm concerned, let me say that I actually work with 3IE, which is the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation. And at 3IE, what we actually push for is the use of evidence to inform policy. But we are very clear that before using evidence, stakeholders, depending on their role, need to have their capacity either strengthened or built the grounds. And in that respect, we recently, from 2018 to now, up to now, we've developed a program, a regional program, that works specifically in Francophone West Africa, called WACIE, the West African Capacity Building and Impact Evaluation Program, where we engage with governments, but also key partners like ASED, Clear Francophone Africa, like ID Insight, in order to collaborate and bring about the change we want on the ground. And that change about evidence use needs to start from what we consider as a typology of actors. And in our work, we have, first of all, institutions that contribute to evidence capacity building. And that is very much in line with the manifesto that the African Evidence Network has developed, and we keep an eye on. We make sure that we contribute to its development on the ground. So from the institutions that build capacities, we have institutions that produce evidence. And those two, we put them into the same group, sort of, as In general, when they build capacities, they also are capable of producing evidence. From that group, we have a second group of project, program, and policy designer, managers, those who actually are in need of evidence, but do not necessarily generate evidence. Then we have a third group of evidence users. Those are decision makers in general. That's where you will have governments, high-level staff who decide on budget allocation, who decide on policy orientation of countries. And the fourth group we have is the group of funding institutions. Funding organizations also are considered in our spectrum. And depending on how we approach the question of evidence-informed decision-making, we think that either of these different type of actors do need to use evidence. Funding agencies need to use evidence. Capacity building institutions need to use evidence. Program developers, managers need to use, decision makers need to use evidence. This is quite important for us to stress on because in general, the focus seems to be on decision makers. Why? If we just shift a little bit from decision makers and come to evidence producers, they need to use evidence and realize that their evidence are not used, right? In order to change the way they approach the question. So that reflection is I think it's quite important in how we approach measuring evidence-informed decision-making on the continent. And regarding example, at 3IE, in the WACIE program, knowing that we engage with all those stakeholders, and we do this in collaboration and partnership with other organizations, one thing that we sort of is a help desk. We have a help desk that is dedicated to summarize existing evidence within 4 to 6 weeks' time based on request. And that request may come from governments. It may also come from universities. It can come also from any other actors that is interested in specific evidence in order to design or inform how they develop a project. So that help desk we think is very effective in the sense that the government of Benin, through its Ministry of Planning, has requested several times now the production of a brief on existing evidence regarding the relationship between vocational training and employment. The Regional Development Bank, called BOAD, the West African Development Bank, has requested recently a brief of evidence on the link between small farmers holders and the use of innovation in agriculture sector. Beyond that, we also invest, and I personally have been solicited by other organizations to build capacity, to contribute to build capacities of young professionals through what we call an evaluation camp for young professionals. And this is another example of, nurturing the newcomers, young professionals, in order for them to realize how important it is to use evidence, so that we have a critical mass at some point requesting the use of evidence in the landscape. And during these holidays, as you know, during holidays, students are in general at home playing. Well, there is a program developed for an introduction of young students to M&E. So, and this is organized as like a workshop where they come and discuss, with lead trainers, how do they use or design evidence-informed systems to address their own interest, like being the best at school, like having their room clean. And in doing so, we sort of gradually tackle all the different components in the system that use evidence. So Jen, let me stop there so that we can move on with the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you, for the opening remarks. I mean, I want to pick up on Jenean bringing in the language of evidence enhancements and collaboration. And I wonder actually if Jenean, in your next remarks, you can talk about if that relates a little bit to co-production when you think about the tools for measuring EIDM capacity development that you can share with us. So I found that really interesting. I'll come to you just now. And Deo as well. It's really exciting to hear about the help desk and all of these initiatives that are happening on the ground. I think there's so much that we can obviously learn from each other and that we are learning right now in this space. So Jenean, I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit for us on some of these tools for measuring EIDM capacity development that you can share with us that in your experience you found to be pretty effective.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Jennifer. So again, around the language of collaboration, and that's something that's sort of embedded within the work that we do. The examples that I used was a curriculum review that we did for the University of Zambia, and then we also worked with the Malawi Assemblies of God University in the last year. And so the approach was to see where the curriculum was, understand the key players involved, and to look at to ask them, what is it that you want out of this? And it was not from a perspective of, and it never is, that we are experts. And I think that's something that's very key for us in our engagement with partners. And so understanding where those universities were, for example, what they've been doing well, what are some of the areas that they want to improve on. And I think also for us to embed, number one, transformative evaluations, for example, including a gender lens, looking at Made in Africa. And that's a big part of the kind of work that we do. And if we are looking at curriculum as a key tool for building a sort of qualified and strengthened cadre or cohort of practitioners within the M&E space, we want to make sure that we are, I think, slowly but surely changing the curriculum. So when we look at Made in Africa, this is a perspective that I believe takes time, and it's not something that people will grapple with overnight. But when we pick out these various areas, who are the key influences? We pick universities, for example. It's not just policymakers. Like Deo said, it's not policymakers that use evidence, for example. We're all part of the value chain using that. And so when we work with universities, for example, at the coalface of education, how can we impact through the curriculum, whether it's a short course, whether it's a master's program, something a little bit longer, as was the case. The one was a 5 days and the one was a BCom program. But to be able to get it to the level where we're comfortable saying, okay, we've included what we think is a really strong and really updated, as well as a reflective, again, going back to what is our position as CLEAR? What is our position as an African-led? What does a Made in Africa evaluation look like? What kind of principles do these espouse? And making sure that some of these guiding principles, as is mentioned in the AFREA guideline, that take indigenous knowledge into consideration, that look at context and realizing that one country differs from another country and the context is so different, and how do we tailor that curriculum so that it reflects that various contexts. And the policy making process is complex, again, differing from one place to another. So these are some of the tools and the approaches that we use when we are co-creating and sharing as well, and creating those platforms like your Glocals, like our evaluation in DABA that we have, where we share on these in terms of our learnings, what we're learning from it, what we're gaining, through our website as well, writing blogs and learning notes, and what works and what doesn't work. So I'll pause there, Jennifer. Thank you.
Fantastic. Charity, could you put a link to the website? Actually, I think we would all love to maybe go to the CLEAR website after this. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jenean. Deo, would you like to also share with us maybe some of the tools, either through 3IE or WACIE, for measuring EIDM capacity development?
Yes, thank you very much. And regarding that question, I would like to start by asking another one. Why really measuring evidence-informed decision-making? Why do we do this? In reality, I think that we do this in order to make sure that wherever it is that we are going or we think we need to be, we are on the right track. And therefore, we need tools to track where we're going. It's like a navigation system, right? And some may say it's quite obvious that we need this. Well, yeah, it's obvious, but we need to know why do we need it? And that navigation, those navigation tools are important. And for us at 3IE, and in the work that I do, I make sure that any tool we use is connected to the other principle we have, say, collaboration. And my response will focus on three aspects. Number one is engagement with government. We at 3IE make sure that we engage with government in order for any evidence produced to be used and bring about transformational changes. In that respect, right now, we are working with Benin government on a child nutrition program, as they've introduced an innovation, which is all about collecting data, quantitative data, supported by qualitative data, from the time that the child starts its very first day. Because in general, we start tracking data on child nutrition after they're born, from day one after they're born. But now the innovation is that they move back to the mother's womb, because evidence show nowadays that the essential, I think 20 to 25% of any human being's potential is built before even we're born. And therefore, tracking that dynamic within the first 9 months, if it happens that the intervention they have in place in Benin has an impact that is quantitatively measurable and supported by qualitative data, then we anticipate on a completely change of how the government approaches human capital development in the country. And that's where measuring evidence-informed decision-making is quite important. That's how we approach it from an institutional perspective, from a government perspective. But we also know that nowadays, there are several innovations initiated by startups, initiated by other social organizations, individuals. So we are also quite attentive to what's happening from that side of, say, the society composition. And in Togo, there is an NGO that developed quite an interesting system. They are called Dokita I. So they have an app where, you know, book an appointment with a doctor. You can key in your health data. You can also request support by a health personnel. And this sort of application they develop is quite a system, because you have several people behind it doing different things in order to help rural people improve their health, be more productive. And right now, they got in touch with health insurance institutions in the country to improve the work they do. And they requested 3IE WACIE to support them in using existing evidence to improve the design of the intervention. But they also want us to help them design an impact evaluation so that they can document, they can track any change attributable to their innovation. And we are doing this in order to, again, not just use existing evidence to improve how we design intervention, but also we're doing this to measure evidence that are or will be produced to, at the end of the day, in fine, inform future policies that hopefully will be extended beyond Togo. That's how taking these two examples show you different perspective of why measuring evidence-informed evidence, tracking evidence. And the third example I would like to give is from experiences I have at the university. As I actually teach public policy analysis and evaluation as a subject. And since 2014 that I started that experience, I had so many students, master degree students. And because at some point I realized that, but I'm not measuring what is the impact or effect I have on these students. I spent so many hours, so much time doing this, but is it really making any change? And at the beginning of this year, I decided to create a platform where I gather all my students, former and current students, where we will collect data on what is it that they're doing from the course, from that specific course on public policy evaluation and analysis. And that's that third example is just to show that at an individual level, we can also take initiative in measuring evidence, in improving the work we do, because what I expect to do is for next year, if the students do not actually share many experiences in the way they are, applying whatever knowledge they acquired from that subject, I would find ways to change the content, to improve how I do it, and eventually help them also to sort of get a space, an institutional space where they can have their very first experience. Because some of them do complain that public policy evaluation analysis is quite a high level subject that they do not find a space as beginners from the university. It takes time for them to be considered as matured enough by the job market. And that's the third example of using evidence and measuring whatever we're doing in order to improve development on the continent that I would like to share. And if Jenny is, Jenny is around, I will hand it over to you, for the next question or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we carry on, actually, I just wanted to know, Jenean, if you wanted to add anything additional to the tools. I could see you, your expressions look like you wanted to add something to this conversation.
I was so fascinated. Thank you, Jen. I was so fascinated by the early childhood development and the kind of advancements that are being made with these kinds of tools, and I think that's really exciting. It also kind of just triggered, something that we've done in the digital space. And we've piloted in Zambia. It's called the African Pot. It's a parliamentary oversight tool. That's something that we've done and trained parliamentarians in Zambia. This is also something that we are doing in Kenya. And so using, and I think merging a research online tool, a research online management tool with evidence and generating that and not just generating it, but using it in a way that's non-threatening, less politicized, has been quite useful. And I think these are, kind of innovative ways that we can share on in terms of the use of evidence and why it's important. And I think, Deo mentioned why it's important to measure, and we'll never know if we're successful or not if we don't measure and how to measure. I think I want to very quickly bring in one very, very powerful example of that in South Africa. And if I take us back to 2006, the president at the time had not believed in the link between HIV and AIDS, and I think we'll all recall that. And so when the decision finally had been taken to accept that, the numbers had dropped in 2006. The number or the percentage of deaths had dropped from 42.9% in 2006 to 23% in 2019. And that's the power, that's almost half. That's the power of evidence production. And I think, again, it's not just for policymakers, but it's for all of us. And so I don't think that we can emphasize anymore how important evidence use is. Thanks, Jen. Back to you.
That's really important. So I just want to even say that again, evidence use is for all of us. You and Deo are saying that, it's for all of us. And just the whys that you both mentioned, I think are really powerful here. And Deo talking about using it as a navigation tool. You're also saying that we will never know if we are successful if we are not actually monitoring what we're doing. I think these are all very much in line with AEN's manifesto as well, to ensure that we continue to learn. So it's really nice to hear us all speaking the same language and learning together. I want to encourage again the group here today to put any questions that you may have for Deo or Jenean as we continue our discussion. We're soon going to move into a Q&A. But before we do that, I wondered if, Jenean, you can maybe, we've been speaking about this a lot, but maybe just elaborate a little bit more for us, systems, structures, and procedures that we can put in place, to support measuring EIDM, because now we're talking capacity development specifically. Now that we've illustrated examples where it's really powerful and, why it's important, how do we now institutionalize it? What are the systems and structures, procedures that we can put in place?
Thanks, Jennifer. I think that's a very important question around sustainability if we want to sustain these systems. One of the things, a research study that we had conducted in 8 African countries, I think in 2019, and we found this throughout the 8 countries, was number one, there was a lack of capacity assessments that were done There was a lack of strategies around capacities. And so when you have these kinds of missing elements, it tells you that any plans around that, if not low, but if they are there, they're very haphazard, very erratic. And so there isn't, one cannot build on systems if you don't even know what the starting point is. So for example, if one would want to intervene with the training, and if there was training that was required in terms of building capacity, right? And we're just going to reflect on training as one component. But a capacity assessment, for example, is useful in understanding at 3 levels. The individual, so we're talking about skills, we're talking about knowledge levels around M&E. And then we're looking at the organization, we're looking at the enabling environment, we're looking at the kind of M&E policies that are in place, frameworks that are in place. So I think one has to take an entire systemic approach when it comes to building capacity. The second part that I would want to hone in is around the learning framework and acknowledging that these learnings can happen at an informal and formal level. And in fact, research has also shown that about 70% of this happens at the informal level. And so I don't think that that needs to be discarded. I think it's important that we find ways to build in these learnings and also create an environment where the learning is encouraged and that we are going back to those places and using it not as a tool to punish, but actually to grow from at the individual and institutional level. So I think there's a question of a culture and an adapting culture around, learning from our mistakes and building from it. And by doing that, we can, have a longitudinal look after a few years and see where we were, where we've come from, and where we want to go. So embracing that kind of learning culture, I think, is also quite key when it comes to capacity development. Over to you, Jen. Thanks.
Absolutely. Wow, that's a lot to think about, embracing the learning culture. If 70%, like you're saying, it happens like at the informal level, it really does speak to how we think about learning and how we should be thinking about learning. This, yeah, very interesting and really important insights. Deo, would you like to add to this discussion on structures, systems, and procedures that we can put in place to support EIDM CD?
Yeah, thank you, Jen. Let me start by being critical here, in the sense that, over the past few decades, different organizations come to the continent and do whatever they think is good to do, but they do this in silo. Some come for capacity building on design evaluation. Others will just come the next day for capacity building on preparing questionnaire survey using digital solutions. And these are just not connected in a very coherent way, following a clear and well-thought theory of change. And thanks to the manifesto, and hopefully we will implement the manifesto, because at some point we need to know why we are doing A and B and how are they interconnected to lead us to C. And from that critical entry point, my way of seeing it that I sort of love quite much is the holistic perspective that Jenny mentioned. And as we're talking about countries, we're talking about regions that need to use evidence for transformation of human capital, for people to be happier. We need to also consider national evaluation system. national evidence use systems. And I think CLEAR is doing quite a great job there with CLEAR Francophone Africa. Any country they enter, they make sure that the system is in place with an institution officially in charge of evidence production and use that the government can rely on when it's time to make a decision and request evidence from that institution. Otherwise, money-wise, we spend billions without really making a change. Evidence are produced, but government don't even know where are the evidence. They may go to universities, but there again, universities are not the only one producing evidence. And if they produce evidence, government may not know exactly the lab where the evidence are located. So considering these systems is quite important, and the countries where WACIE 3IE we work in partnership with CLEAR Francophone Africa here in the Francophone West Africa region, we make sure that we approach this from a holistic point of view. Now, coming down to the practical aspects or the practical ways that we use here in Benin, in Niger, in Togo, in Senegal, or Cote d'Ivoire, going to Mali. It's essentially important for us to make sure that we do not bring evidence to government or to decision makers at the end of evidence generation processes. We need to start the journey with them, and along the way, pause and share whatever we start finding, so that when we complete the journey, we would have built some sort of relationships, partnership with government institutions, so that they are not either intimidated by the finding or feel not really concerned or involved. So the idea here is to build a partnership that will make evidence users, key actors. I mean, the group that we consider as the policy makers. We involve them along the way. And at 3A, we do this through inception workshops, where we sort of validate evaluation questions that are all about what kind of evidence do we need? Asking, being guided by evaluation questions should be deeply borne by the kind of evidence country needs, region needs. From inception workshop, we then move on to these sort of intermediary finding workshops, where we report to them saying, whatever work we started a few months ago, here are the initial findings. And then at the end of the process, where we collect inline data and produce, say, evidence and get answers to the initial questions, then we gather them again to report whatever happens. But an additional, say, approach that we now more and more use is not to limit ourselves to workshop, in-presence workshop, or one spot workshop, but use digital systems where we produce small videos of less than 3 minutes, taking the essential information out, and then use this on YouTube and disseminate through those new channels. Nowadays, through Twitter, we can do this. Through Facebook, we can do this. And, to a great extent, I think that we on the continent have to move away from the classic dissemination approach. We need to use WhatsApp in order to disseminate findings. Why not? We need to use our social media. Of course, that whole big package of knowledge will not travel to people as a big mass of knowledge, but the essential will go into pieces so that decision makers, students, mayors, and all the other technical staff can be aware that evidence are produced out there, and they can easily either access evidence or request more details in order to inform the work they are supposed to do to improve lives on the continent. Because I think we are more and more aware that the solutions, the approaches used till recently are more adapted to other ecosystems and not necessarily to the African ecosystem, to the African environment. Like our rural area, the way they function is different from the way rural area functions in Asia or in Europe. So the manifesto comes at the right time, and we need not very big, complex ideas to improve evidence use on the continent, to improve how we measure evidence. We just need to, I will say, rise up and be innovative. So those are ways that, at 3IE WACIE we use, but also the perspective I have as the regional coordinator, I push along those lines. Small ideas, act on it to improve the way we use evidence. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, Deo. Small ideas, big impacts. I mean, WhatsApp is accessible to all of us, so that's fantastic. Jenean, I wonder if you want to also again come in here. How Deo was talking about inception workshops and how those were used as a way to really collaborate from the beginning. And earlier on in our conversation, you spoke about the approach and the collaborative approach in which you approached curriculum development. I believe was it Zambia? I can't remember the country, but if maybe you can elaborate on in a few examples that we can pick on some lessons there.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, definitely a lot of similarities that we share with Deo. So, for example, if when we engage with the country at the very inception, so we'd call that a scoping mission. And part of that is us asking a lot of questions about what they want to achieve. What does the country want to achieve? And as far as the mix of interaction and the stakeholders that are involved, we think very carefully about the various players that must be a part of that conversation, and that they have a voice in that. And I think, like Deo said initially, when it comes to policymakers, when it comes to sort of your senior government leaders, you want to have them involved in the process. And so that buy-in is so critical, and it's going to make such a huge impact in the work that you need to do. And having them almost champion that process makes a huge difference. So, that's one of the ways that we engage a country is in that scoping mission. We'll ensure that the right players are at the table, involved in it, contributing towards it, and letting us know rather than us going in there with our own agenda of what we want to do. And so when they're part of the process, it just makes everything so much easier. And again, it speaks to the issue of sustainability, because when we leave, we want to make sure that this is something that countries are able to sustain long after we've left. So this is something that we did, like in Malawi, for example. So in the scoping mission, then we could find out, for example, okay, there might be a need to work with the university. There might be a need for some trainings which we also did like in Lesotho. So it's a very holistic way of engaging a country and finding that there are different needs that will come out, and then we begin to embrace that and get involved in that sort of collaborative way. I don't know if that answers you completely, Jen.
It does. It does. I thought it would be a nice way to complete the circle with you, like giving a few examples from Clear Air as well. I want to give a natural break in our conversation to allow not just for comments, as Precious has just put in the chat, to share insights, questions, anything that you would like to maybe add to the conversation. Precious, Charity, Siziwe, I don't know if you're maybe getting questions directly that you would like to raise to both Jenean and Deo. Okay, I take that silence as a no. So we will carry on with our conversation, and if there are questions, I'm sure we can see the hands up, and Charity will alert us to this. So just to carry on with what we're talking about now, we've thought about sustainability and our approach. Perhaps we can think about how we ensure learning from our M&E of EIDM capacity development during and after. So, I mean, a lot of these examples that have been provided, how do we ensure the learning before and after? If you can maybe, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Deo.
Yes, Jen, let me go for that. And before talking about how we ensure learning before and after evidence is produced, assuming that's the complete question, I think it's very important nowadays to stress on the need for Africa, the need for the community of evidence producers, users, to take advantage of the digital revolution. Because if we want to improve how evidence are used on the continent, we need to be really creative about using applications, about using these sort of virtual meetings, virtual webinars, engage more with government, engage more with NGOs. One example that that I would like to share with you is that here in Benin, together with ASED, that's an NGO in the area of environment and nutrition, that NGO is very much into the use of evidence by, say, agents in rural area that design small projects. But they then approached WACIE 3IE to know the best way they can do this to sort of bridge, connect those project managers, project developers on the ground with evidence. So in that process, well, USAID was ready to provide funding to design a small course, but also a platform where evidence can be available and accessible to people. And that NGO then, ASED, gathered, say, stakeholders, power holders who are into project management, and taught them how to use existing evidence, where to go and find existing evidence. Because some may feel intimidated and not go for that. They may not even know where to find the existing evidence. So they were trained, and then they have access to the platform. online whenever they're ready and want to, and they can promote or share the link with others in their network and beyond. I think those sort of small steps are quite innovative and do bring about the change we want, the change we expect in terms of evidence use on the continent to inform any decision we make, any decision about human development, human capital on the continent. And we are all concerned, we all do this, and therefore we all need to use evidence. Coming back to your question about the best way to ensure learning, you know, the end of my example is, I think, well connected to the way of learning using basic and not expensive, hundreds of millions of dollars before we start this sort of journey. Because on the continent, we do not have too much resources available. I mean, in terms of funding, finance, we have limited resources, and therefore we need to design solutions that are adapted to our context, our reality. Ensuring learning in government environments, again, we need to take advantage of this digital revolution that's happening, IT world. We need to go there. And if it's possible, as I am more and more doing now, to influence the curricula in at universities, but also at secondary school, to show students how important it is to produce and use evidence in order to address any challenge we have in our daily lives. I think that's those are examples, perspective, or how we can ensure learning and sustainable learning, as Jenean often put it. Sustainability matters for us on the continent. Sustainability in the use of evidence, and not just use of evidence during the life of a project, and once it's over, the rest is just collapse, and we need to start over again and again. As Africa, we do not have time to start over and over again with respect to evidence use. Thank you.
Thank you, Deo. We have about 5 minutes left in our discussion today. So, Jenean, I want you to be able to comment on this question, but we also now have a question in the chat. So perhaps you can comment on this question briefly, and then we can address some of the questions that are coming up.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Yeah, so very quickly, one of the things, or one of the tools that we use is a tracer studies. And so that is an internal reflection on the work that we do, and it asks key questions about our offerings and the effectiveness of the offerings that we make and get involved with. And so I believe that is a useful tool when it comes to learning about what we do, how we do it, whether we should continue with certain things, and to be able to quickly make that adjustment of what we continue with and what we don't continue with, how we beef up some of our offerings. For example, are we pitching our trainings at the right level? Is there enough of a market for particular things? Are there some courses that are market responsive that we should be providing? For example, like social investing, there's an increasing demand in that. So this is kind of the information that would come out from our tracer studies, and that's a very, like I said, an inward-looking tool that we use. I just want to very quickly cite an example, a short one, that our former director, Dugan Fraser, used. We were involved in a platform, and it was a new project, setting up a platform for engagement, for knowledge sharing. And we already started with it. There was a little bit of money invested, not a whole lot, but we started it off and had engaged a consultant, and it just was not taking off. And so I remember the director saying something that, which stayed with me, and he says, I'm a firm believer in failing fast. And so with that, we cut the project, we cut our losses, and we realized that we didn't need to drag it any longer. And what I appreciated out of that was that it's okay to fail. We learn from it, we grow from it, and knowing when to fail quickly. I think that was something that was very useful, and minimizing risk, minimizing massive expenditure. I think that was a key takeaway for me from that. Over to you, Jen.
Thank you for sharing that example. Charity, would you like to read out Karina's question? I saw your hand up.
Yes. So the question says, can panelists share their thoughts on how learning can be encouraged or enabled, especially in public institutions where the emphasis is typically on compliance? What tools and or mechanisms can be offered to public institutions in this regard?
So I think anyone who's ready with a response can go ahead.
Okay, I will maybe just give a few thoughts on that, and I think maybe Deo would want to come in. But I think when it comes to behavior change, when it comes to developing a culture around learning, particularly when it comes to your sort of public or government governments, really. So this is something that takes time, and I think creating again the informal and formal spaces and platforms to be able to encourage that is important. And I think having the mindset that it takes time. I think some of the things that one can use to encourage that is incentives around sharing, creating and being deliberate about creating an environment where it's okay. And I think if I have to reflect on the example that I just cited now, for me, that in our institution, it enabled me to share things, and it made it okay to know that, yes, these things happen and this is how to grow from it. So I think using examples, I think using examples of where things have worked well and incentives can go a long way in terms of slowly building up an environment of change, because it doesn't happen overnight. So yeah, I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenean. Deo, do you have any thoughts to briefly add to this question?
Yeah, I think 2 points here. It's about behavioral change. It takes time, and therefore one needs to be patient. I believe that initially sensitization, engagement with government in plain language is quite important. And number two, having an enforcement mechanism in place will also help to ensure that government officers do use evidence produced out there. But I see here a question from Karina. If we can the panelists indicate whether they think there are any difference between M&E in general and M&E of capacity development effort and M&E of evidence? Yep.
I think we are almost at time with that one, so it'll take too much time to unpack that one. I think Karina will allow us not to unpack that in this exact session. We'll have further opportunities to do that. But to round out our session fully, I thought perhaps maybe I would give you each 1 minute to just, give us a take-home message on everything that we've discussed today. But what is your one take-home message? I'll start with you, Jenean.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, when it comes to evidence use, evidence generation, evaluation, capacity development, we're playing the long game. And I think it's critical that we acknowledge the strides that we've made, and also to be patient in building that up and continuing to acknowledge that there's various forms of learning, there's various places of learning, and that when we do that, to also consider the approaches that we take and to realize that things take time, but we will get there.
Thank you, Jenean. Deo?
Thank you very much. I would say that measuring matters. If we don't measure, we may end up at a place where we don't want to be. And measuring guides us along the way so that we bring about the Africa we all dream of. So measure, measure, measure. Thank you.
Thank you both for such a fantastic discussion. I'm going to hand over back to Siziwe to end the session.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you, Jenean. Thank you, Deo, as well, for the discussions that we've just had. Masidiso, I saw your comment on chat and Karina's comment. We'll take those to start the conversations on LinkedIn as we continue the discussions around this topic, just to make sure that they don't fall through the cracks in any way. And we will also share the recording for the people that did not have an opportunity to attend this session. And we're also going to put together a blog for all your thoughts and ideas that we've shared today, so that people have a bigger picture on what we've discussed today and how to take those conversations forward. So we're really, really excited in closing this webinar series this year. We're looking forward to more and more conversations going forward. And the next event for the AEN is Evidence 2022. It will be fully virtual, 19, 20, 21. September 2022. Look out for how to register so that you can join us and participate and celebrate with the AEN its 10-year anniversary, and also an opportunity to look back at the past 10 years in relation to EIDM and looking forward to the next 10 years, and also just celebrate what we've achieved as Africa throughout this period. So I'm looking forward to those engagements with everyone. So thank you so much to all the participants as well. You know, some of you have attended most of these webinars and continuously engaging with us. So thank you so much. We appreciate all your contributions through this webinar. So we're closing off. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Jen. Bye.